Welcome, everyone. So good to see some familiar faces and new ones. And we'll give one more minute for people to arrive. Charlie, while we're waiting, all right. So welcome everyone to this panel discussion on AI in education with a focus on assessment. My name is Bill Penuel and I'm from the inquiryHub group at the University of Colorado Boulder. And we're a group that supports equitable STEM education at scale to prepare students to be scientists and innovators for a more just and sustainable world. We're offering this discussion as part of our service to the CCSSO Science Collaborative and State Performance Assessment Learning Community, or SPILC members, to help understand advances in AI, opportunities for using AI in classrooms, and possibilities and trade-offs for AI use in assessment design, task engagement, scoring, teaching about AI, equity and ethics. And funding for the seminar comes from the Learning Policy Institute. We have a wonderful group of panelists who are doing work in AI that is a bit different from what you may have heard about with respect to, say, personalization or supporting lesson planning using AI. We're going to talk about assessment applications, and we mean something quite broad by that. So that is a set of processes that develop evidence that can be used to improve teaching and learning. Some of the applications you'll hear about today help students with peer self-assessment. Others present feedback to teachers to help them improve. And we'll hear about how AI can make it easier to administer and use complex assessments in the classroom through automated scoring. I will briefly introduce the panelists who are with us here today before we get started. And I'll ask them to wave and indicate them, although you can see their names below at Zoom. Michael Chang is an assistant professor at the Boston University Wheelock College of Education and Human Development and has been part of the Institute for Student AI teaming here at CU Boulder as a postdoc. And Thomas Breideban is also from the Student Center Institute for Student AI teaming at CU Boulder, where he serves as the acting associate director. Jamie Poskin is at TeachFX, where he serves as the founder and CEO. And TeachFX's mission is to promote more meaningful and equitable classroom dialogue by supporting teachers' work using technology to provide educators with regular automated feedback on their practice. Jennifer Jacobs is an associate research professor at the Institute for Cognitive Science, whose research focuses on teacher learning in STEM. And Xiaoming Zhai is associate professor in the Department of Mathematics, Science, and Social Studies Education at the University of Georgia in Athens. And his work focuses on applications of AI in assessment, particularly to support scoring of complex assessments in science education. Thanks to all of you for being here. I wanted to name that this session will be recorded for others who can't make it. And the format is going to start with me asking questions of the panelists. And as questions arise, we'll ask you to post them in the chat. But we'll take some time at the end to answer some of those questions as panelists are able in chat. And if your question isn't answered, please feel free to reach out to one of us on the panel afterwards. And we'll also try to answer some in the chat. Because this is being recorded, if for some reason you don't want to be on the recording, feel free to turn your cameras on. And we're planning to post these online, and we'll send out a link to those of you who registered and are here. So without further ado, I will begin. And I'm going to start out with some questions for Michael and Thomas. You two are working on a project that's focused on using AI to help students become better at collaborating in small groups. Can you tell us a little bit about that project and how the AI that you developed came about?
Yes, absolutely. And first, let me say thank you very much, Bill, for the introduction. And it's great to be here with all of you. As Bill mentioned, we're with the Institute for Student AI Teaming, which is motivated by the foundational question: how can we promote deep conceptual learning in classrooms for all students? And our work focuses on how can AI serve to help with that, especially when it comes to collaboration, which, as we know, is a very critical foundational skill also for the workforce. Our vision of AI is to think of it as a social collaborative partner that helps both students and teachers to make learning more effective and engaging, which is a slight departure of what we commonly associate with AI, which is more of an intelligent tutor that helps individual learners. Our concept is more to focus on the support of groups. And in that case, when it comes to assessment, we're looking at peer assessment, we're looking at like self-regulation of a classroom. And the AI project that we've been working on is called the Community Builder. I should note that our institute is now in its 5th year, and all of our research is very much coordinated with all of our stakeholders. We work with youth, we work with teachers, parents, all of our stakeholders are involved in the process. And one output and beautiful nugget of this experience is what we call the Community Builder AI Partner, which is a system that is able to support small student groups in helping them better understand how they're collaborating in the classroom. It originated during a workshop that we have annually, which Michael has been leading. And I want to hand it over quickly to Michael so that he can tell a little bit what that origin was, and then maybe I'll give a couple of additional comments about how COBE, the Community Builder, works in a classroom.
Thanks, Thomas. Yeah, and as Thomas mentioned, and kind of alluded to, a big part of our institute's work has been how do we ethically and responsibly develop new technologies as we're thinking about how we actually incorporate them into our classroom. So we drawing from this framework of responsible innovation by Stogo, and we can post it in the chat if that's interesting to folks, kind of guides us in thinking about how we can do that. And a big part of that, a big part of Stogo's framework of responsible innovation is to help us think about how might we responsibly anticipate and inclusively anticipate sorts of hopes and concerns that young people, teachers, families, stakeholders might have in terms of how AI is incorporated in their classrooms. So we've been holding a series of workshops that we called Learning Futures workshops. And the goal of these workshops was to mostly work with young folks and ask them, what are your ideal forms of collaboration look like in schools? And then within those worlds of what schools could look like, what is the role in AI in that process, right? So it's a pretty big switch from the normal way in which we're thinking about, we have this hammer that is AI, and we're thinking about what are the problems that we can solve in school. So we really turned that question around. And this is where this idea from our workshops and this approach is kind of where this idea of a community builder came from. And part of our goal was to support young people in looking at a number of different kinds of collaborations that they wouldn't normally experience in schools to inspire these new AI metaphors. So one of the ways in which we worked with young people to think about this was a cooperative house that I used to live at when I was a grad student. And that's where they learned about this thing called this person in the house called a community builder, who essentially worked with all the members of the house to collectively come up with a set of agreements about how you share the space. And then the community builder holds them accountable for it, right? So that core idea later on became an AI device that the young people came up with themselves called the community builder. And like Thomas mentioned, the goal of the community builder is to support, first of all, students and teachers in talking about how they want to collaborate within a particular small group STEM learning context, tell the AI this, and the AI holds them accountable. And that sort of creates the context for students and teachers to collectively reflect on how well they're holding accountable to those collaborative goals. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a sense of how we went from these workshops to this tool that Thomas mentioned that we've implemented and is actually in classrooms today.
Yeah, I just want to kind of add a little bit, and I want to take up a question that I'm seeing from David about AI being agentic. So the idea with COBE is that It's designed to unobtrusively kind of support the students when they're working together and provide a resource that they can look at. COBE essentially is a web application that creates visualizations from student interactions, and it picks up on these moments when they're doing really well, when they collaborate, and to basically provide a visualization that can spark these conversations. So in the sense, it's not agentic, that it doesn't hold the kids in the classroom accountable. The kids hold themselves accountable by creating their agreements for how they conceive their ideal collaborations, and COBE is then supports that and augments, enriches the pedagogy of the teacher who orchestrates these meaningful conversations.
Thomas, there is another application that is a little bit more agentic that's in development, the GIA tool, right? And can you say a little bit more about that? Might be good to say, like, this is yet another way, right, of supporting and providing feedback on collaboration.
Absolutely. So the one that is currently in development, it's called GIA, stands for Jigsaw Interactive Agent. And if you all are familiar what the Jigsaw activities are like, the creation of expertise for individuals and the pooling of expertise to solve a problem, this particular AI partner is different from COBE, that it supports the individual groups as they're working on completing a project with things such as making sure that team members are heard, can contribute to the collaborative activity. It might suggest additional resources if maybe a team is stuck at a certain spot, and it's able to help navigate and guide a team through a collaborative activity. So in that case, it is more interactive. It's a step further than what COBE is capable of.
And it's trying to notice ideas that maybe ought to get taken up, is that right? And but aren't necessarily?
Exactly. So the other idea is that it can nimbly pick up on these suggestions that kids in the team are making, and then maybe combine those to provide additional opportunities to solve particular complex problems, for example. And so the idea of the AI partner is not just having a tool that supports the collaboration, but also a tool that helps the kids learn how to collaborate.
Right. Tell us a little bit about some of the things that you're finding. I'd be curious to hear both about what we're finding in the classrooms, and then Michael, maybe go back a step and say, what did we learn about what's in the key conditions for being able to help students like envision something that's beyond the typical collaboration they encounter in schools?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question. So with a slight caveat that we're still kind of need to collect more data, but so I would probably frame this more as preliminary findings or trends. But what's something that is very interesting, aside from the initial observations we had in classrooms where kids are really excited and interested in seeing these visualizations of their student talk, which is very exciting for them, that they're basically creating these visualizations for their learning community. What we're seeing is that it's over the course of a curriculum, we're seeing increases in collaborative problem-solving behaviors among students, specifically when it comes to using ways to negotiate and coordinate and maintain kind of cohesion in the team. So the more the students progress through the curriculum, we see an increase with that AI partner support. The other thing that we're seeing is an increase in turn-taking. So like that could go along the lines of more equitable interactions, that kids in these groups are more cognizant of bringing others in and asking questions of one another so that everybody has a chance to contribute. So this is very encouraging, what we're seeing, but we still need to collect more data. And I want to kind of hand it over to Michael to say a little bit more.
Yeah, I think the thing that I would just briefly emphasize here is that one of the things the young people really highlighted, that the thing that they wanted the most was to feel cared for, they wanted to feel heard, and they wanted to feel respected in the classroom setting. And they wanted to do so in a way that really recognized them in their full personhood, right? Like not just who they show up with in the classroom, but who they are outside of this. And specifically in the context of community agreements, they really emphasize that we're not just looking for community agreements that are the stuff that we typically hear in classrooms, right? It isn't just that be nice, pick up each other's ideas, come to, problem-solving skills. Like these are things they thought were important, but they also wanted things that kind of recognize their different ways of collaborating that didn't get picked up in classroom spaces, right? So one of the things that we've been exploring in our workshop spaces is not only how do we build this tool, but how do we actually create the context within classrooms to support teachers in sort of taking on these tools in the ways that the young people in our co-design workshops have been thinking about, right? How do we really create that organization, that culture of care, that foundation of care within classroom spaces, right? That is really, really central. And there's a lot of ways in which we as an institute have been thinking about this. One of the ways that we've been doing that is creating a series of curricular routines in which teachers are supported in kind of working with students to actually come up with these community agreements that might not show up in a typical classroom context, and then also to support them in reflecting on the collaborations that they're having.
Great, thank you guys. I want to turn now actually to teaching and teachers and the kinds of feedback that AI is offering up to teachers. And Jamie, tell us a little bit about what TeachFX is up to in terms of how you're using AI to support teachers.
For sure. Yeah. And I think, we at TeachFX share a passion for student talk with the Kobe team. And I think hearing more about your work, which I'm already familiar with, is just so great because it really goes hand in hand with what we do. So so I started my career as a math and English teacher at the high school level, and founded TeachFX about 10 years after starting teaching. And what the tool is at heart is a way for teachers to, they essentially pick a high leverage teaching practice that they want to focus on getting better at using more in their classroom. And then they record audio of their class, usually just on their phone. So like they're picking that practice on their phone and they're recording. And then we analyze that audio in order to give the teacher positive feedback on their use of that practice. So we'll count how often they're using that practice, and we'll show them some great examples of that practice in action in their classroom that they can play back and listen to. We measure a whole host of practices, but we're talking about things like when teachers give their students opportunities to respond, when they ask open-ended questions, when they press students to explain their thinking in a deeper way, when teachers build on what students are saying and reiterate, oh, so it sounds like what you did is you added 70 to 30, but where did 70 come from? So these kinds of moves or fine-grained measures of instruction, our AI detects those and then shows teachers when they're doing those, and presents that in a way that is a really quick reflective experience for the teacher. So we have now had the privilege of having professors around the country do research on insights that are in our tool, and have consistently found that when teachers receive this kind of feedback, they make big changes to their teaching, and it has impacts on student outcomes. And what we're really proud of, and what we've really designed this tool around, is that impact only requires a very small amount of the teacher's time. So they're looking at our reports for just a minute or two, really. And that whole reflective experience is designed to happen in this very quick way. And it works in getting teachers to do things like say, do you agree with what Jamie said or not? Say more about that, or tell me more. Yeah, I think that's the quick version, Bill.
Right. I'm going to turn to Jennifer Jacobs too from the CU team. We're involved in some partnerships, so you're involved in some partnerships to do some similar things as TeachFX. What are some of the contexts that you're working in, and how is AI helping teachers and also I think it's tutors too who are getting feedback on their work?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Yeah, we're doing something very, very similar to what Jamie's doing. We have a very similar philosophy, and we a number of years ago we designed an application called the Talk Moves application that does something very, very similar to TeachFX. And our current work is actually in partnership with Saga Education, which is a nonprofit provider of tutors, math tutors. And we are working with them to incorporate our application into their system where they provide feedback, automated feedback for tutors, is similar to what Jamie's describing. But Saga, what's a little bit unique about them is that they also hire coaches. So we actually adapted our system to provide this as professional learning opportunity for coaches to work with their tutors. So the coaches see the feedback, and then there's some professional learning in there so that they can support their tutors to improve their discourse. But what's brand new is that this year we are working with them. They have a lot of tutors who actually don't have coaches. That's kind of new. So now we're going straight to tutors and thinking about how do you give this feedback to really novice? These are really novice tutors. They're mostly they don't even have a teaching background. So it's kind of like a pre-service population, and we are basically brainstorming ways to do this, but we think two possibilities are rehearsals. So we think that probably bringing tutors together to role play their discourse. Some are students, some are tutors, and then getting feedback that they can discuss. That's one way that we're going to experiment with giving this feedback. And another way is what has been called nudges. I like to think about it as kind of what Jamie suggested, which is sort of this positive encouragement. Nudges can have a kind of negative, like do more of this, but instead we're thinking of it more like you did a great job doing X, doing, open-ended questions or press for reasonings. So keep going, keep doing that. And that could be like an individual reflective tool that tutors get. But the questions for us are like, what's the right grain size? If you write to tutors, it's not overwhelming, that's positive, that's reinforcing, and that makes them want to continue to look at this feedback. Yeah.
Jennifer, you just spoke to something I wanted to follow up on, which is what are some of the key design considerations or decisions that both of you all have had to make that feel really consequential, maybe were even difficult to figure out? Tell us, let's unpack the design process and maybe too, like, what did that design process look like? Were teachers involved? How did you go about that?
Do you want me to? I'll go briefly, and then Jamie.
Go for it. Yeah.
So in our work, we have a commitment to co-design. So we've co-designed all the components of our application with and for the user base. So with teachers, with coaches, and we're hoping to co-design with tutors, meaning that they are brought in. So we're not creating something and then testing it on them and seeing how it goes, but they're involved in the creation process.
Yeah, and we take the same approach. I mean, co-designing with educators. We also, I mean, we have about 10,000 teachers who've used TeachFX. So we also get, in addition to getting their sort of qualitative feedback and ideas, we can really look at like what drives a teacher to use this thing 5 times versus 10 times versus only once. And we do a lot of that sort of pairing that objective data with the sort of qualitative interviewing. I think to answer your first question, Bill, about like these decisions that you make, and Jennifer, your comment about grain size, a big decision that we've made recently is, we know from research that teachers tend to improve more rapidly and more lastingly when they're focused on one particular insight. So while it is very tempting for us to show all the amazing things that we can show you about your pedagogy, and to show, 25 different insights about your lesson and stats, what we've really found is that by having teachers select one practice that they're going to focus on and really streamlining the experience and the visuals and everything around just this very simple experience, that leads to more tight engagement with the tool and bigger behavior change. And, sometimes teachers will press that like dive deeper button and look at all sorts of stuff, and that's great. But those are big decisions in terms of like how the order in which and how much data you present. And it's been something that's been very top of mind with us as we made another major overhaul this summer.
That makes me wonder, a little bit about more broadly, what are some of the conditions and professional learning opportunities that need to be in place to support teachers in learning how to use these tools effectively, not just to promote things that are productive, but also equitable kinds of discussions in their classrooms. Jamie, you want to start? And then
Yeah, I can start. So, I mean, one interesting and thing that we're very pleased about is that in a lot of the studies that have been done on our feedback, there wasn't professional learning. So we kind of got to see how it worked when it's just like, hey, yeah, you're just going to receive this. And we saw all the kinds of positive impacts that we normally see in our implementations, which our implementations do include professional learning. Even without that, we believe the effect is obviously much stronger when you're pairing this kind of data with, we always talk about the why, what, and the how. So why is it important to provide opportunities to respond to students? Why is it important for students to be talking in the classroom? Teachers are generally leave feeling inspired and ready to think about their pedagogy in a new way when they've been able to have a discussion about why this stuff matters to them. And then, the what is often the actual, like, how do you press students to explain their thinking? What do you literally say? When do you do that? Do you plan that in advance? How do you do it in the moment? So we do workshops on that as well. And then the how piece for us is, how do you use this data to reflect on your own? That part is usually pretty self-explanatory, but often, we know school systems are complex and there's lots of different opportunities that this data can really make the conversation better. So if a teacher's bringing this data into a PLC or grade level or team meeting, how can they use that data to really fuel that conversation? I mean, Heather Hill is a researcher who's written about our, the work we're doing. And, she has shown that teachers usually are spending their time in PLCs talking about assessment data, but that actually isn't impacting student learning, because talking about assessment data by itself doesn't really change the way that you teach. And so a lot of our professional learning work is centered on how to use this data in the formats that already exist within the school system and within PD workshops, et cetera, so that you actually are seeing change in teacher practice. And so that has really helped fuel, I think, a bigger impact from getting this feedback than you would see. I mean, like I said, we did see good impact and benefit to student learning outcomes, even without that support. But the support, I think, is a really force multiplier, thinking about getting.
Jennifer, anything to add here and focusing on equitable discussion?
I'll just say that what I really, really appreciate about TeachFX is that their interfaces by themselves are not just presentations of data. There's a lot of surround, there's a lot of support, so that they are a really effective individual reflective tool. And that's what we're working towards as well, for tutors, to really provide that ability to look at a piece of data that has some support for you to individually understand it and interpret it and take action on it. And also to create, similar to TeachFX, a suite of PL options where if you opt in, you could be part of a community of practice. So there are different options for people.
Great. I want to turn now to Xiaoming. Your work focuses on using AI in scoring assessments, but not, typical tests, these kinds of complex assessments that we are doing in science ed these days, three-dimensional assessments. Tell us a little bit about what you've been working on these past several years now, and what are some of the things that you're finding?
All right, thank you, Bill, for the question. My work focusing on automatic scoring basically came from I was a prime member of the NGSA project. So we developed a lot of constructed responses assessment focusing on science practices like argumentation, explanation, and then we ask the kids to write responses or drawing models to explain science phenomena. But the challenge is teachers don't have sufficient time to grade the students' response and apply the feedback. So that prompted my work using natural language processing and computer vision to automatically score students their written responses and drawing artifacts in classroom settings. And all my work, actually, the final goal was trying to use the assessment information to support the teachers' instructional decision making. So I focus on my current past project focus on two major aspects. One aspect is how can we automatically provide, assess students their responses, and how can we better present the findings to teachers so that they can use the information to make immediate decision in classroom settings. And the second aspect of focusing on how can we support teacher, because we cannot assume teacher will be able to use the information immediately in classroom, right? Some knowledge teacher or, on the different instructional settings, teacher will need some support. And so we focusing on how they developing instructional strategies with the aim to improve teachers' pedagogical content knowledge so that they can leverage the information provided by the automatic tools so that they can support the student learning in a timely fashion. In that sense, we are currently focusing a lot of like a technical challenge in terms like automatic scoring. For example, one really challenge we are facing is most real data we collected are kinds of unbalanced, right? So we have 5 categories, but we only have maybe 5% on a given category. Then in that sense, if we train the machine using the data, then for the given category, the accuracy can be low and potentially can generate some bias. How can we, test the problem? How can we fix the problem? Like we work on some like data augmentation approach. We use generative AI, and we also develop our own large language model. We try to develop large language model with specialties in science education so that we can reduce the amount of data to train the model and increase the accuracy. And we work with, for example, with PISA. Last year I was in Germany, and the project we were working on was trying to leverage the PISA data. It's a German data, so we developed a German version science education board, which I think increased the accuracy compared to the German board, like around 10%. So that's very really exciting. And we also try to address some challenge into like how to unpack the machine scoring process. It's a black box. People know we can only see the result, the accuracy, but we don't know whether how machine make the inference and assign the score to students. So we also do some explainable AI to try to unpack this process. We also work on the second aspect is trying to support like a teacher's instructional decision making, right? So and because teachers, the students can be really diverse, and in another IES grant, we are trying to especially support teacher to support the students, the second language learner students. So we try to use AI to detect the potential bias or some patterns in this process and try to understand the difference between the EL students, their writing as compared to the other students. So it's very important that we have to realize in assessment, there are some construct of our interest, and there are also some variance in the student score are irrelevant of our interest, right? So when we develop all our assessment, our automatic scoring approach, we try to split the two types of variance in student scores, construct interest and construct irrelevant variance.
Let's come back to bias for a second. You just mentioned it, and we talked quite a bit about that in our session in the fall. What are some considerations around bias from design to articulating the scoring algorithm to scoring to interpretation? What are things that people should be mindful of in this process that you all are attending to in your work?
Thank you, Bill. This is a really great question. First of all, I don't want to assume that all automatic scoring or AI outcome will have observable bias. So there can potentially be bias, and but the extent of the bias, whether it's observable or is significant, needs some empirical evidence. But in terms like theoretically, we can understand that because machine learn from data, and if the data, inherently includes some bias, some biased data, it can potentially, develop the algorithm to mimic the bias came from the data. So I think in my work, the most important concern for me is the unbalanced data. So if we have unbalanced data, it's very likely to generate bias. And another aspect is if even we have balanced data, we still have to think of the data quality, right? So the who label the data and how they label the data, and whether the procedure was monitored and was examined so that the quality of the labels are really high enough to avoid any potential bias. I take bias really seriously, and this new project we're working on, we especially focusing on bias, right? And but so far in education settings, to my limited knowledge, I haven't seen really serious empirical study and provide evidence of bias. The reason there's a lot of media, talk about the bias here and there, but I do feel the field need like a rigorous
Needs more research on this very topic. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is great. Thank you all. And I want to open it up to the panel now to talk a little bit about something that you've heard here that you see as commonalities with what you're doing or differences, maybe things that you're excited about and also worried about. So this is more open-ended among the panelists, and be preparing questions because I'll turn to that, questions in the chat that we can take up next. But panelists, have at it. Talk to us about something you see that you've just heard about here that you're excited about or worried about.
Okay, I can go first. Something that I'm excited about, and I just want to piggyback on what Xiaoming said, was this notion of the black box and this desire for us to create these white boxes, to make it transparent, to make it explainable. And that's something that we're also attempting to do with the AI tools that we develop. The idea that you can pop the hood, you can look behind, you see the decision-making process of these AI partners, so that this can also become a conversation about AI literacy, understanding how AI systems work. So we're trying to demystify, but also provide technologies that can support novel ways of interacting in classrooms. But I'm excited about that push towards transparency and explainability.
Thank you. Thank you.
One, I think, beautiful similarity with the Kobe, with Jennifer and TeachFX's work that's very much shared with the Kobe team is I think in both cases we're sort of going for this goal of getting students to really talk about their learning and verbally process their learning, and not just their learning, but their social interaction, because that's a big part of what we care about in education. It's not just like learning facts, it's also learning how to get along with other people. And when we think about the traditional levers that we pull to help make that happen, I mean, often the one that if you talk to a school district, they're probably buying a curriculum to try to help with something like that. And I think there's a nice symmetry in the lever we're trying to pull is sort of teacher self-awareness and the teacher's pedagogy and ability to conduct practices that help the student do that. And the Kobe team is really looking at direct levers to the student, which in some ways is like, man, that's probably more effective for the students, their own self-awareness and their own motivation. And I just think that's those are just such powerful levers that aren't often haven't really been explored that much in education, particularly the in the moment student stuff that you all are doing. So I just thought that was a cool connection.
Yeah, really, really appreciate that point, Jamie. Like one of the things that was coming to mind was, if we look at a lot of the AI tools being talked about more generally, a lot of the focus is on how do we make that most accurate prediction as possible, right? And there's sort of the sense that there is a like de facto most accurate prediction. But I think one of the things that I appreciated hearing about today was we're all trying to create tools that support teachers, students in making sense of what happened, like not to the point where the tools being like, this is a good collaboration, this is a bad collaboration. It's like, this is what a tool thinks is good collaboration. What does that mean about how we think about collaboration? And what does that mean about how we think about the tool itself? And I think it's like a really important reframing of like how we actually think about these really important issues that are coming up in sort of the AI ethics space, but typically without a particular context, like educational context, where we might be able to think about more specific things like how curriculum can sort of shape those conversations and so on and so forth, if that makes sense.
Well, I really appreciate the point. I wanted to just add and highlight some point that you already presented. I feel like AI it really makes us feel excited, but AI itself cannot really transform education. What we really need to do, we have to think of the pedagogy. How can we make a good pedagogy, and so that a teacher can really leverage AI? AI can, as we can imagine, AI can generate the biased result. AI could help students to cheat in classroom settings, right? So what's the strategy and the pedagogy we can help teachers to develop so that they can leverage AI and avoid all the negative aspect? I think that's some really urgent work that educators or education researchers are currently really working on.
Yeah, and to say that exactly same thing, but in a different way, is that I think all of us here are working to design AI tools that support teachers, support students, and not replace. We're not trying to design cost-effective ways of replacing educators, bots and things that might just directly support like higher test scores or something. We're really in the service of creating tools that enhance what teachers are already doing.
Well, and I think the other, when people imagine AI, they often imagine somebody like locked in on a computer interacting with a chatbot. And I think all of us are trying to say, no, 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 you can use AI to get people to talk to each other and to have that happen in more meaningful and more human ways. And it's sort of almost the opposite of what folks typically think about when they think of uses of AI.
I want to push the group a little bit because I know, from being inside some of these conversations, this work is still hard and has a lot of dilemmas and things that probably worry you and concern you. What are the concerns about the applications that you're working on, that you have, that maybe keep you up at night even?
I can start from my current project. We develop automatic tools and we try to engage kids to use the tools. I think the first thing come to our mind is the cost. And the cost of the platform currently is a big bill for us. Like we're going to sustain this project and benefit more students. And currently, how to find a economic server, and also we use language models is super large, right? And every assessment task we did an individual model, and that's really need a lot of space in the server and cost a lot. Every month you receive a big bill.
And
That's
there's an
one
environmental cost too that's becoming more and more apparent too
Oh
for
yeah,
that.
yeah. So I had a meeting a day before with Ashok, the another AI institute in Georgia Tech, and I asked a similar question. They also receive like a big bills every month, like.
I think the one thing, I wouldn't say that it keeps me up at night, but it's just something that I'm kind of like still wrapping my head around how we can really meaningfully tackle this. Is that what I would maybe call like trust calibration into AI systems, because one thing that I'm finding with also through the observations that we're making, where we see also how kids encounter these AI systems, is that there might be a little bit of a tendency towards overtrust, or like and as we know, AI systems, they live and die by their accuracy and reliability, but sometimes we want to have a little bit also an appreciation of that messiness, of that, the limitations of AI systems. So how to meaningfully help the kids to understand what is overtrust, what is undertrust, what is right, what is appropriate, as these kids are developing their literacies around AI. I think this is something that I'm excited about, and still think that this is a big kind of milestone, lamppost in the future.
Michael, I know you've been thinking and writing a lot about infrastructures of care that need to be in place for this kind of collaboration. Can you say more about that idea and where it comes from?
Yeah, this idea of infrastructures of care, it comes from one of our recent workshops with youth out in Oakland. And the big part of this idea, like I kind of mentioned earlier, was that students have really experienced schools in a way that is really individualistic. It really sees them as just being kind of like a conventional test score that's representing who they are, and that's where their value is as a person. And they want to be seen as so much more than that, right? They want to be seen in their full political identities, in their community identities, and also just like who they are as a person across all those different dimensions. So one of the things that really keeps me up at night is, we've created these tools in these co-design contexts, the goal of which is to surface these, different ways of doing things. But then schools themselves, and the way these institutions are created, are really structured towards a very different end. Oftentimes what I hear from teachers and administrators is about a really strong focus on conventional assessment, conventional assessments. So then, and when we talk to teachers, it's a really like strong commitment towards seeing the students for their whole selves. They want to see themselves as caring for their students, but they also are pulled towards assessments, and they feel like they're kind of like stuck in between those two worlds, right? Like I have to do all the things that the administrators want me to do as a teacher, and I have to do all these care-based supports for students. And in some ways, as researchers who are thinking about how do we create this care in the classroom, how do we build AI, how do we, introduce this whole new tool into that world, it's creating this huge burden, a huge lift for teachers to have to do. And that for me really keeps me up at night, because it makes me wonder, like, should we be even centering AI in the first place when the deeper issues are really about these much more organizational things, broader systemic things that are affecting the experience of the students. And I really wish I had better answers to that, but it is something that we're trying to do as an institute, to try to build some capacity across teachers, administrators, and also ourselves as researchers to address some of these things. I mentioned the routines earlier, coming up with new ways of evaluating learning within classrooms, which, Bill and Thomas can speak to if we have time. But, these are all things that I think we're constantly grappling with and don't expect any easy answers to in the near future.
Thank you. Before we turn to questions, I want to give Jamie and Jennifer a chance to say some of the concerns they are.
I'll try to be quick. The main thing that keeps me up at night is I have 4 children that are 5 and under, so they're just waking me up. But to me, the biggest thing that keeps me up at night is just how it's hard to change systems within schools. I mean, there's a lot of bias toward the status quo, and I think school and district administrators are generally punished when they are making a ruckus or trying to change something, and yet everyone agrees that the system isn't doing what we want it to do. There's that saying, the system is perfectly designed to create the outcomes it's creating today. And so I think that tension is really just the core challenge when you're trying to, introduce a new way to get out, to improve outcomes for kids. And I think the other one for me is just a little bit unrelated to the first, but just, as I think about we want to be a tool that is used by lots and lots of teachers. And I sort of have this fear that if we don't do it, somebody's going to come in and do it for all the wrong reasons. So whether that's to evaluate and punish teachers, or whether that's parents who want to monitor what's being said in the classroom so that they can, whatever political agenda, these are truly terrifying visions of the future that I feel there is this kind of world of the classroom that is a highly contentious space right now. And I really want to make sure that we're prioritizing what matters in that space, which is that kids are learning and becoming flourishing human beings.
Appreciate that. A larger systemic context that Michael's talking about too. Jennifer, anything to add?
I mean, that was really well said by everyone. I think a thought in my head and kind of addressing the question in chat is the application that we're developing, it's this way to give information to people at scale. Any lesson you record, you can get feedback on. You don't have to wait for a coach or somebody to come and talk to you. But at the same time, a concern is it requires recording a lesson because the feedback is discourse based. So there needs to be audio or something to give that feedback. And in some ways, everybody records everything right now, but also at the same time, there's a lot of concerns around privacy and recording in classrooms. So it's a sort of toss up.
Just to name the question that's in the chat, and I want to invite other people to answer it, is, and this comes from Nirul Shah, who's done some really great work himself with teams on a tool called Equip, which helps people and teachers get feedback on who's talking and the equity of participation in classrooms. And so I think he's wondering, and I'm wondering too, there are a number of tools that don't use AI that are focused on promoting more equitable participation in classrooms. What does AI add to support equity specifically?
I like the way that the question's framed in terms of what does it add? Because that is how we think about it. I mean, to me, the answer, and Jennifer said it, is the scale piece. I was never observed by another adult my entire teaching career. There are huge human capital challenges in education, and it's just very hard to provide the kind of support that we would ideally want to provide with current resources. And so, I think Linda Darling Hammond did that study around, I think she looked at 8 or 9 different PD interventions that were, that were effective, that actually had a proven effect size on student outcomes. And on average, those interventions took 49 hours of teacher time. And that's in addition to the other, the administrators, the people orchestrating the intervention. And that's just not, that ain't happening. Most teachers aren't getting 49 hours of PD in anything, let alone one particular intervention. So to me, the key role, I'm sort of my classroom was very low tech, and so to me, it's like, well, we need AI if we're gonna be able to support people with any kind of scale, and that's really what I think the answer to that question is for us.
One thing that really excites me about this question, when it comes to equitable participation and how AI could augment this, I'm thinking about how we express ourselves in different ways, and that there might be some who are more language based, but others might be more gestural. They might be more non-verbal in how they can contribute to the work of a team. And we are kind of working also towards the idea of how can we accommodate different forms of expression that go beyond a language and that takes into account basic gestures, especially when it comes to working together with physical objects in a space. So we're very interested also in the multimodal component to make it easier for everybody to participate, contribute to a collaboration as they see fit. And the other thing, the other question I'm seeing from Charlie here is also very interesting, but I want to kind of maybe let somebody else contribute to the first question. But I find this very, very fascinating to see how can AI can support equitable interactions. For past tools that have looked at supporting groups when it comes to equity have focused mostly in terms of turn taking, basically counting the amount of time that somebody speaks and then maybe giving suggestions on giving everybody balanced time to speak. But sometimes there are folks like me who use a lot of words to say relatively little. And then there are some who are much more economic and succinct in their conversation. So they need different amounts of time. So turn taking simply like counting minutes is not really sufficient in thinking about equitable interaction. So we're trying to take into account different modalities of interaction and how can we support this with AI.
Shall we take up this as our final question? Probably we have time for one or two answers to this around how to support educators in that kind of trust calibration that Thomas was talking about, being reasonably critical while maybe giving some things that might seem worthy a try.
I'd like to take this question. I think it's a really good question. So when we talk about teacher and how teacher use AI in classroom settings, I think it's very important to guide the teacher to understand the purpose of using AI for either high stake or low stake settings, right? So understand the purpose can help teacher to select the potential, even though they have some concern, but they still see the potential to promote their use within their classroom. More importantly, I think we need more rigorous research to provide evidence to convince teacher to use AI. Of course, there's a lot of research and literature currently calling for to improve teachers' AI competence, right? So how can we support teacher? And recently, my colleague analyzed the national AI strategy from 50 countries, 50 nations, and every nation mentioned how to improve their workforce, their teacher, their AI competence, so that they can, help students to prepare for future career.
Well, it looks like we are at time, and I want to thank everyone for being here and for your really great questions. And also, Melissa's been popping some resources in the chat. I want to mention the Contextus.science website too, where you can find some resources related to the earlier series that we had, where we had all these panelists on, as another place that you can go. So please join me in thanking our panelists for their time today, and thank you for joining everyone who was able to join today.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.